On today's episode, we're going to get a look at the new Portrait Bokeh AI found in the latest update of Luminar AI. I'm excited about this one. Stay tuned. Hello everyone and welcome to the Joy of Editing with Dave Kelly. I'm excited about this episode because I've been waiting for the longest time for Luminar AI to give us Portrait Bokeh AI, and it's finally here in this latest update. And this update has just been released. Now this is Luminar AI update number 4. So this is version 1.4.0. So if you haven't fired up Luminar AI yet today, go ahead and do that. And it's going to ask you, hey, do you want to install the new update? You definitely want to do that because inside it, you're going to find the new Portrait Bokeh AI. And now there's a better workflow with visual texture previews, perfect sky positioning in Sky AI. That's new. And even more convenience. Who doesn't want more convenience? I know I do. Today I want to mainly focus in on Portrait Bokeh AI. I'll do other tutorials on the other updated features, but today let's get a good look at the Portrait Bokeh AI because I'm so excited about it. I've been waiting for this for such a long time now, and probably a lot of you have too. But let's dive into it. I'm using Luminar AI today as a standalone app. And all that basically means is whatever edits I apply to the image, the next time I open up Luminar AI as a standalone app, you'll see those edits on the image. Now, they are non-destructive. In other words, they're not actually baked into the image. That won't happen until I export the image as, say, a TIFF file or a JPEG or whatever. But in the meantime, they're just a set of instructions. Okay, now let's go ahead and check out Portrait Bokeh AI. Now, I'm in the editing screen, and to get to the editing screen, if you don't have it, see right up here in the menu, it says Edit. Just click on Edit. Now, you can go to Templates, or you can go to Edit. You can go to Export when you're ready to export your file after you've already done your editing. But for now, we're going to do our editing. And as I said, this is a non-destructive workflow. So let's go ahead and click on Portrait Bokeh AI. We'll start out with a mount. So if we take the amount slider and we start to drag it to the right, we're going to add a bokeh effect to the background of the image. And you notice you can see a red overlay over the people here. That means they're protected from getting the bokeh. Now this is not simply just blurring out a background with, say, a Gaussian blur. This is actually giving you a realistic bokeh effect. The kind of effect that you would get from using an expensive, very shallow depth of field lens, say like a 2.8 lens or something like that. You're going to see a similar type of a bokeh effect. Now, the further you move the amount slider to the right, the blurrier or the more bokeh effect you're going to get in the background. And that's too much, so I'm going to come back to where I was, and I think it was right around a 60, right there. Now we have a brush control here, so we can brush over areas that we need to correct. Now, is this perfect? Now, remember, this is the first update that has had Portrait Bokeh AI, so I'm sure it's going to get better as it goes, but it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And I'll show you what I mean here in a second or two. But now let's pay attention to this area here called brush control. Now, we can alter the focus area, the defocus area, or we can restore areas, okay? I don't really mess with the restore. At least so far I haven't been using restore. I'm only using defocus and focus. Now you can use shortcuts. X will change between focus and defocus, which is nice. So if I type the X key, you'll notice defocus highlights. I type the X again, now focus highlights. And of course we have a radius. This is nothing more than a brush size. We can adjust the softness or hardness of the brush right here with this slider. We can adjust the opacity of the brush with this slider here. So if I take a zoom into my image here, and here's what I'm saying where this isn't 100% perfect. You see this area right in here? It missed this area, right? Now I can use a shortcut of a left and right bracket key to make my brush smaller. Left bracket key makes the brush smaller. Right bracket key makes it larger. So I can come in here and make sure I'm on focus, and I can paint back in this area on her arm that was missed. And now that's filled back in. So let me go ahead and zoom back out. So again, is it perfect? No. Now here's another spot that it missed right here. So let me make my brush a little smaller, and I'm on focus so I can come here and paint this area right in like so. And now you can see that that hand is painted back in. So you got to go around and take some time and examine areas that it's messed up on, and you do have to fix them. But take your time to really examine around the edges of the people so you can see if there's anything you need to fix. Now, I'm not going to spend that time right now, but you do want to take that time and get it right because you want to make sure this looks realistic. And you do have the brush tool to help you fix up the problem areas. Let's now look at some more adjustments inside of this Portrait Bokeh AI tool. Now, you have this section called background, and if you're not seeing these adjustments, it's just closed. So click on this little triangle right here and you'll open this area up. And inside here you have brightness. Now these controls are dealing only with the out of focus areas or the bokeh areas. So if I adjust the brightness to the right, you'll notice that the out of focus areas get lighter. Or if I move it to the left, they get darker. If you double click brightness, it'll go back to its default position. Next up, we have a highlights glow. Now, whenever you're using your lens and you're getting a bokeh effect because you're using a shallow depth of field, a lot of times your highlights will have a little bit of a glow to them. And that's what this slider's for, to add that realistic glow to highlights. So you just move it to the right, and the highlights will start to get a glow to them. So that's really cool. So play with this. You don't want to overdo these adjustments, but you just want it to look realistic. But I think right around there looks good. Next up, we have warmth. If you move this slider to the right, you'll warm up the bokeh area. If you move it to the left, you'll cool it off. And again, if you double click any of these names of these sliders, you'll send them back to the default settings. This next slider is called depth correction. Now think of this as setting up the image's depth of field. In other words, when you use a camera lens, if you want a lot of the image in focus, you would use like an f16 and you'd have a lot of depth of field in the image. But if you use like an f2.8, you'd have a very shallow depth of field with a lot of blur in the background. And see that blur in the background. Now, if I move this to the right, you're getting more of a, say, like that F16 look with more in focus. And as you start to move it to the left, you're getting a more shallow depth of field. In other words, when you keep moving it to the left, you're going to get less of focus in the background. And sometimes it takes a second or two for this thing to update itself. Now, 0 is a good starting point, and I find for a lot of images that I've been working on that 0 works out pretty well. But if you want a more shallow depth of field, you got to be careful. Just keep bumping it to the left. It's like saying, you know, I went from maybe say like an f5.6 to now like to an f3.5, and if I keep moving it to the left, it'll get more shallower and more of the background will go out of focus. Now, I find it when you really start to move it to the left, it takes a little bit of time for it to go out of focus. And yeah, it's going out of focus. Now, let me move it the whole way to the left, and you'll see. Give it a second or two, well, actually a few seconds, because it's going to go all out of focus, and which is going to look real unnatural. But that's going to happen right now. You see that? And generally, you don't want that kind of a look. It just looks too artificial. And what I'm going for here when I'm using Portrait Bokeh AI is I want to simulate a very expensive, shallow depth of field lens. And so most of the times I'm going to be using mine around, like, say, at the 0 point. Now, if I double click depth correction, it goes right back to 0. See, and that looks real realistic. Let's go ahead and try it out on another image. This is a cool image. Let's see what it does on this one. So let's take our mount and let's start to move it to the right and just set up that background to give us the right amount of out of focus area that we want. And right there looks good. Now I can see right here, it's missed this area right here. So with my brush, I can make sure I go to focus and paint over this area to bring that back in focus, and you can see it fixes that area of the blanket. Now there's some other areas that miss, like it missed right in here, and you'd have to go in here and put this to defocus, and you could just paint over this area. I'm just being really sloppy there, but you can see how that goes out of focus in that area. Now I'd make my brush smaller, and this time I would type the X key and go back to focus, and I can just paint up here just like that, and you can see that her leg will be fixed. And part of her body here is missed right here, and I can go and fix that. But you got to take your time. And then on her arm here, I missed a little spot. I'm being very sloppy here, but you get the point. But you got to take your time, and you got to and you got to get it right. And the other thing you can do is you can zoom in when you're doing this. I highly recommend this. I'm using a Mac here, so I'm just using a trackpad, and I'm just pinching, and I can zoom in and back out with the trackpad. Zooming in will really help you to be able to take care of those problem areas that Portrait Bokeh kind of messed up a little bit. You can fix those with your brush tool. If you don't have a trackpad or a mouse that lets you zoom in and zoom out, you can just come right up here to the upper right hand corner and click this drop down, and you can zoom into different levels here as well. For instance, you can come in and zoom into say like 200%, and then if you hold down on your space bar, you'll get a hand tool, and then you can take this and you can move it around. And I'm just going to go back and fit it to screen. And then, of course, we can adjust our brightness of the bokeh area. We can darken it up if we want to. We can add a little bit of highlight glow. And let's say we want to warm that background up just a wee little bit. And then we can adjust the amount of depth correction. If I want a more shallow depth of field, I can move this into the left and get a more shallow depth of field. Let's come in even more here. Or if I want more depth of field, more in focus, I can move this slider to the right and I will get more depth of field. Or double click and it sets it back to the default setting, which I think looks really good for this image. But there's that one. And on the first image, I forgot to show you what edges correction is. So let me show that to you now. So look at the girl's hair, this particular girl's hair right here. When I move this slider the whole way to the right, watch how that hair just tightens in. It all starts to pull in. In other words, the mask is getting a lot tighter. And then when I move it the whole way to the left, the mask will get wider and more of the hair will show. You can move it to the left. It'll make, it'll cause the mask to grow a little bit. When you move it to the right, you're shrinking the mask. But I find generally the default setting of 20 generally works pretty good. But if you need to tighten up the mask, move the edge correction to the right. If you need to loosen up the mask, move it into the left. And now let's move on to our last image. And now our last image. Let's open up Portrait Bokeh AI and let's move the amount slider again to the right. And we'll start to blur out that background. Let's blur it out even a little bit more. Maybe something like that. Looks pretty good right there. Everything is looking pretty good. It's missed a spot right here of blur. So I'm going to make this brush smaller. In other words, this palm tree right here is in focus. It thinks it's hair. So I'll make this smaller and I can either click defocus or type my X key and just paint right down on this palm tree and it'll take it out of focus just like that. But again, take your time and get it right. This is just because it's artificial intelligence doesn't mean it's a miracle cure-all. Sometimes you really got to work with this stuff. And as an added bonus, let's go ahead and replace the sky. Let's add some clouds to the sky. So let's come up to Sky AI and go to Sky Selection. And let's just get some puffy clouds and see what we get here. Now the shadows are going to the right. And are my clouds going to the... Yeah, I think my clouds are going in the right direction. Forgive me if they're going in the wrong direction. But one thing I want to show you here is when you are working with skies, you could come... Because remember, this is in the out of focus area back here. You could come back to Portrait Bokeh AI and come to the brightness here and drag this to the right. And watch that sky will lighten up as well. And I like this because Portrait AI looks at that sky edition as it was originally part of the image. And that's a really cool feature here. And of course, I can always add some glow to the out of focus area, and it's also going to add some glow up into the clouds if I need it. Let's go ahead and warm up the out of focus areas just a little bit. That's way too much. Maybe just a tiny wee bit, just like that. And of course, we can work with the depth correction, which I think it looks pretty good. But if I want a little more shallow depth of field, I'll move this slider a little bit to the left. And right there, I think it looks good. But there you go. Here's the before and here's the after. Well, there it is, everyone. That was Luminar AI, a brand new update with the all-new Portrait Bokeh AI. Pretty cool, so give it a try. If you enjoyed my tutorial today, please give it a like and share it with your friends. And if you're not yet a subscriber to my channel, please subscribe, click that bell notification icon. Then every time I upload a new tutorial, you'll be notified about it. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me today in The Joy of Editing with Dave Kelly. I'll see you all right here next time, but until then, happy editing.